Oh, hey, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to look at Orzhov Midrange, Orzhov tokens, whatever you want to call it, in Standard. Currently, this is my favorite Standard deck. I'm having this issue with Standard where I don't really enjoy playing any of the decks, but when I stumbled upon this deck, I really liked it. So let's jump right into talking about the deck and some of the card choices. So the way I came across this deck is a few weeks ago, an Esper deck won the Standard Challenge, and it was essentially this deck, except it was splashing blue for some counter magic in the main deck and sideboard. Now, I think that's a really good take on the metagame, but I did not like the shell that it was in splashing for this counter magic because I really wanted to tap out like every single turn, and I often had to decide whether to just like hope my opponent plays a spell that's relevant in the main phase so I can counter it, or cast a good spell in my hand. So in doing that, it just didn't match up with my gameplay style, but I really enjoyed the deck. So I decided to cut the splash and play some other, like, better mid-range cards, some more removal and whatnot. So that came across black-white mid-range or black-white tokens. The lands are pretty straightforward. We have to be really black heavy because we're running 4 Invoke Despair, and we also have double white on turn 4. So we're playing 5 tap lands, the Rafine's Tower because the cycling is really valuable, and a single Shattered Sanctum. To make sure we hit those white sources, but also leaning black. Only 2 plains, 7 swamps, 1 of each of the channel lands, a single Roadside Reliquary, which is just like a sweet draw card later on. I mean, I think the mana, besides being really black heavy, is kind of free in a 2-color deck. So, you know, having a late game draw card is pretty solid, especially when you're running, you know, artifacts and the other side of Edgar and Reckoner Bankbuster and enchantments like Wedding Announcement. It's not that unrealistic to be able to draw 2 cards off of it. You know, pain lands and whatnot. The mana base is pretty straightforward. Running a single cut down. Cutdown's pretty solid. I think this deck's a tiny bit soft to the mono blue Delver deck, that super cheap Standard deck. So, you know, dealing with Delver, dealing with like a small Haughty Djinn, you know, really early on is pretty solid. And it's just solid main deck against most decks. Like, it'll find a target, just isn't great against a lot of decks, so we play the rest of our playset in our sideboard. We're playing 3 Destroy Evils main deck. I think the enchantment deck's one of the better decks in Standard, and being able to kill those enchantments, being able to kill things like a Fable. I think Wedding Announcement just like is straight up the best card in Standard at the moment, which draws me to this deck. Being able to kill these Wedding Announcements before they even get a token. And in some corner cases, you know, being able to snipe a Shield Dread or something like that makes Destroy Evil very, very strong. We're playing 3 Infernal Grasp. The get lose to life is definitely relevant because, like, you don't want to draw Infernal Grasp against and kill small creatures against mono red or something. But this is still, even after the banning of Meathook Massacre, this is still a super mid-range heavy format. And so I like Infernal Grasp, you know, to be able to kill those big creatures, be able to kill creatures that we might not necessarily be able to answer otherwise. Now, Tenacious Underdog, I did try a Mardu version of this deck so I could play Blood Tithe Harvester, but Tenacious Underdog is also fine. We play 4. This is just like curve restrictions, like being able to have a turn 2 play is pretty important. Also, it's great in the late game. You know, it draws cards in the late game, bring it back from the graveyard. I found we have such a good top end anyway that I don't actually blitz it that often. But when you do decide to blitz it, it is obviously always great for anybody, which anybody can say about Tenacious Underdog. But it's mostly being played as just like a solid turn 2 play that has like reasonable late game value. We're playing 3 Reckoner Bankbuster. So the reason I'm not playing the set in the 75 and I think 3 is good is first off, Reckoner Bankbuster is the best card advantage card in Standard. And these black mid-range decks have to play it to be able to keep up with each other in late game play. The reason I'm not playing 4, like most black mid-range decks, is I think the top end of our deck is much stronger than other black mid-range decks, especially in the card Invoke Despair. So you're often drawing a bunch of cards in the Invoke Despair, or you're gaining a bunch of life with Invoke Despair. We're taking a hit with our mana base to be able to play the card, so it better be great. And so I've rarely found myself burnt out with this deck and wishing I had more draw power in Reckoner Bankbuster. Often, you have Reckoner Bankbuster, maybe you need to draw into Invoke Despair with Reckoner Bankbuster, but you're eventually casting this Invoke Despair, drawing 2 or 3 cards, and then casting a bunch of your other, great top-end cards. Wedding Announcement I would even consider a top-end card because this card's nuts, but Wandering Emperor, casting a Shieldred, casting an AO, even casting an Edgar, can really seal up the game when they're cast, one after another after another. Oh, you've answered all my threats. Invoke Despair you. Okay, I refilled my hand one after another, and the game just ends. And so I haven't wanted more card advantage, so I ended up cutting the 4 Reckoner Bankbuster because very often the second Reckoner Bankbuster doesn't really get used besides as just a 4/4 vehicle. Now, to the card that the deck is based around of is Wedding Announcement. Wedding Announcement is a nutso card. Black mid-range decks, especially in the absence of Meathook Massacre, have a really hard time dealing with go-wide strategies. Now, a full-on go-wide strategy, I don't think I'm super into, but Wedding Announcements allows me to play the powerful cards in black midrange and still go wide. Pumping up your Shieldreds to being bigger than enemies, or Edgars, being able to trade with an opponent's Shieldred is awesome. It feels so good having your cards bigger and just getting, even at the very least, getting 3 tokens that end up being 2/2s puts us at a great spot against these other black mid-range decks and is exactly where I want to be moving forward. We're playing 2 Graveyard Trespasser. The game life is solid. There's plenty of tenacious underdogs running around and other graveyard play, especially that white reanimator deck, which is just nutso. So having some graveyard hate, having a solid, it's great against mid-range. It's fine against mono red because it gains some life and is a fine blocker. It's hard to remove. It's just a solid card. It doesn't necessarily go along with our game plan as a whole, which is just go wide and or play super, super powerful cards. But it's great right in the middle, and we play the rest in our sideboard in case we have too many bad cards in our deck, or we're playing against a deck with a ton of graveyard hate. So there we have it. Playing 3 Wandering Emperor. The original deck had 4. I kept getting gummed up on Wandering Emperor because once you cast it, it's not really answered that often because it can protect itself. Having a card that can answer something for 3 and for free, essentially, and also be a threat is really powerful, especially against these recursive threats, like in the mirror match, like Edgar or Denick, in the Esper matchup. Being able to get rid of something for good is awesome. I think the one bad thing about Wandering Emperor is it doesn't kill AO, and AO is just nuts right now. But Wandering Emperor is the beginnings of our endgame threats. And it's also another removal spell against most decks, especially since a lot of decks are just splashing blue for counter magic, the Grixis deck and most of the Esper deck, et cetera, et cetera. Being able to Wandering Emperor and end step kind of force them to answer it and then untap and Shieldred or Edgar or AO or Invoke Despair is really important in this deck, I feel like. Not playing everything at sorcery speed, which I think these black mid-range decks have an issue of doing. Shieldred is probably the second best card in the deck. Shieldred is dominating Pioneer just by being a card in and of itself. Casting Shieldred can just win you the game by itself very often if it's not answered. Card's great. You gain life, they lose life. I don't know what else to say about Shieldred. It's great. Edgar goes along with our tokens theme. On the front side, it's mostly just a difficult to deal with threat, right? It's just a 4/4. The +1 to vampires rarely happens unless it's flipped to the coffin and then back again. Or you've brought in a Sorin or something, which is kind of cool, like a cool accidental synergy. It's just a difficult to deal with threat, and if they deal with it, if they want to use their spot removal on it, in these Black Mirror matches, it helps you with this go wide strategy alongside the Wedding Announcements, and then it flips back to Edgar and makes the vampires even bigger, which feels great. We're playing 3 AO the Dawn-Sky. Mostly for that first ability. But 1, it's a threat in the air that basically nothing can block properly. So they have to deal with it with a spot removal. And then when they and it can't be answered by Wandering Emperor. And then when they deal with it with a spot removal spell, you get Shieldred or Wandering Emperor or Edgar or at worst Wedding Announcement or Graveyard Trespasser, and especially the Wedding Announcement. Like, all that's totally fine. Today I was playing in a league, and I already had a Wandering Emperor out. They killed AO the Dawn-Sky, and I got 2 tenacious underdogs off of it. It was like, deal. Love that. So it's a must-answer threat. If they don't answer it, you win in the air. If they do answer it, then it just kind of replaces itself with something just as or more powerful. And then one of the cards of the deck is centered around Invoke Despair. So it's as a go-wide strategy and then also like a super card advantage strategy. Invoke Despair, makes them sacrifice a creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Everyone they can't do, they lose 2 life, and you get to draw a card. So this is card advantage if it doesn't kill something. If it does kill something, that just like gives you more time to play your super, super heavy hitters. The deck I've found this is exceptional against. One is the enchantments deck, the Selesnya enchantments deck. Actually, I guess it's Naya now. The enchantments deck this is excellent against because it always hits 2 things, and then you always get to draw a card for the planeswalker. But it's also great against the Jund deck. In fact, the Jund matchup is a little rough if you don't see Invoke Despair. Very often what I've had happen to me is they have like a single creature out, they play like the crazy saga that like, it just like does a ton of stuff. I forgot what it's called. Let me look it up really quick. Yeah, they play the Kami War, which is like a super must answer saga, and you've been able to kill the Kami War, kill the creature that is always a great threat in those decks, and be able to draw a card. Just like swings the match in your favor so dramatically, and that happens all the time. As far as our sideboard goes, the cut downs obviously for these small creatures that are trying to aggro us out. The 4 Duresses are really important because for these like generic mid-range decks, but it's also great against the red-black Anvil deck. And also, like I said, I think this deck's a little unfavored against the mono-blue Delver deck, and being able to shore up that matchup by just like getting rid of their counter magic, because that's how they beat you, because your threats are just better than theirs, but yours cost more mana. So if they counter your threats, you're in a lot of trouble. Being able to get rid of that counter magic is excellent, moving forward. Unlicensed Hurts is pretty much exclusively for the Reanimator deck. You really need to try to shut them down between Unlicensed Hurts and Graveyard Trespasser while trying to kill them with your other stuff. Destroy Evil to complete our playset in our main deck. Again, really solid if you're trying to kill enchantments. If trying to kill something toughness 4 or greater, there's not a lot of decks that have a ton of creatures like that. But, you're dealing with Fable, the Mirror Breaker, you're dealing with the enchantments deck, etc., etc. It's great. Graveyard Trespasser, again, if you just need like a fine mid-range card, if you have too many bad decks or bad cards in your main deck, or just for Graveyard Hate, is why we bring it in. Sword in the Mirthless is mostly for these mid-range and control matchups. Being able to like get incremental card advantage and end a threat in and of itself is exactly what we want. And then Farewell is our reset button. If we're playing in a matchup where it's very possible we'll fall behind, and in addition to falling behind, we are also dying over a reasonably long period of time, like they can't kill us super fast, we bring in Farewell, because very often what will happen is they answer our threats, they get ahead, and then there's no chance we can win because our threats just cost so much. And so being able to cast a Farewell into them just overextending into the board because they don't expect it, being able to untap and then play your own cards is very powerful. So there you have it. That is my black-white tokens, black-white mid-range deck in Standard. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments, any other like generic comments. That'd be really cool. Please check me out on other social media. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.